to the Bridge the Gap podcast. Here's your host, Dustin Ludke.
Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of Bridge the Gap. We got a fun episode tonight. We're going to be talking about the concept of core memories, which, if you don't know what those are memories that are more important to who you are as a person, your behavior, your personality, the way you think about things, the way you interpret the world. And it's a concept that really came out of the movie Inside Out from Disney. And so when I was thinking about this concept and who I wanted to have on, I thought, I want another father. I want another guy who's big into movies. So I have got for you guys Chew Russell, Father Dynasty himself. For those of you who may not know, Chew had me on his Father Dynasty podcast. It was like the second or third podcast I had ever done. Maybe it was probably almost 2-3 years ago now. So, Chew, how's it going tonight? Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and what you kind of got going on this season?
So, Dustin, thank you for having me on. Yeah, I'll say it feels wild to be on the other side. I know it was a couple years ago you being on my podcast, but you can find me on Twitter at Father Dynasty. And the same at Father Dynasty for YouTube. The Father Dynasty podcast has been a bit of a hiatus for this season, but certainly just interact with me on Twitter. I am there every single day. But yeah, Dustin, just glad to be on, glad to be talking, fatherhood, core memories, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at the Dean13 or Dustin Ludke on Blue Sky if that's your new jam over there. Two of you got on Blue Sky yet?
I have not. Honestly, I don't even like any social media, so the fact that I'm on Twitter is purely because of need at this point.
I hear you. I feel the same way. So we're going to be talking core memories, but before we get into that, we start pretty much every episode with a game.
What exactly is the game?
Well, it is not a quiz or a trivia contest, nor is it a test of brute strength or athleticism. At its core, it's just a children's game, and I would wager that some of you here this evening have played Would You Rather?
So, Would You Rather, a classic game. So, I've got two Would You Rather for you. Would you rather have a movie made about your life, but you have no input? You're not involved in the story or their interpretation of your life. It's some person on the outside looking to go, I'm going to make a movie about your life. You have no say over whatsoever. Or would you rather have a book written about your life that you have a lot of input into, that they sit down with you? Maybe it's even like a memoir of or a biopic, or you get to you maybe help write it or co-write it, but you have a lot of input in the book. Would you rather have the movie with no input or a book with lots of input?
So this was pretty tough because I was trying to think of some, if I wanted input, if it was the movie, like what am I missing out on? Like if I'm thinking of like what I would pick, it's director, who's going to play me, that sort of thing. And while it would be tough if I'm not getting to pick that, because I think in my mind, I don't know what the story is like. Admittedly, I don't know what a movie would even look like of my life. Would probably be tremendously boring.
Probably. I mean, all of us would.
That's right. But I think I would go with the movie. And the only reason is, while I wouldn't have any input, I know with how things are nowadays, it could have the chance to be tremendously successful, or it could become a cult classic for how terrible it is. So either way, it will be memorable. And I can laugh if it's terrible. I can just laugh at how terrible it is. I can live with that.
It's a really good point. I didn't think about that. Like, it could be so bad that it's good. Or, like, it could just be like The Room, where it's just this awful movie.
Oh yeah.
I think part of my fear with the movie is because I have no say in it. Like, how are they going to portray me? Are they going to portray me how I would want to be portrayed? Like, are they going to portray me as the good character, or is it like I'm Adolf Hitler? Like, what are they doing with me? Like, in my interpretation of who I am, and the slant they take on my life and the stories and the experiences I've had. But I'm like you. I don't like reading, to be honest.
100%.
I read very little. I have a goal this year to read more books. I just read a book for the first time in like years, and I loved it. And it was, like a businessy book called The Third Door, which I loved. And I think it'd be great to have that input and really tell my side of the story and kind of have that kind of direct the narration of the story. But
yeah,
I want a movie. Like, I want to see who they cast as me. Like, I want to, right? Like, I don't care about the director, but like, I want to see that, because I'm much more of a visual person. That's just who I am. And I think you're right. You made a really good point. Like, it could be so bad that people just watch it because it's so bad. And I think that's good. And I had this Would You Rather because we're talking about core memories, which I said, again, are memories that are really important. And I'll read the actual definition. from the internet. It says a core memory is a memory that is considered to be especially important and influential in shaping a person's identity, behavior, and outlook on the world. And like I said, this comes from Inside Out, the movie, which has Bing Bong. And I don't think I've ever actually seen Inside Out, to be honest with you. I know it's a really good movie. I just have never seen it or the second one. Um, so that's really what it is. So, what are some of your core memories? And we talked before the show that both of our memories are not great in terms of like remembering our lives. But what are some of your core memories that you have that maybe are outside of sports? Like, what are some of those things that when you think of core memories, like what are those things for you?
So yeah, this was the toughest part for me. One, remembering because my memory is atrocious. But two, if it's not sports, because I feel like I
Yeah.
associate so many things with sports, whether it was, of course, playing, whatever sport or enjoying a sport. Hopefully enjoying, depending on which of my teams I'm following.
Yep.
Sometimes enjoyment's not exactly easy to come by. But if I'm thinking of stuff outside of sports, uh, you know, growing up, I think about, just the simplest stuff of my house was always the one that was basically the hangout house.
Oh, nice.
And so, I mean, I grew up a couple 100 feet from my elementary school.
Oh,
So it ended up being, and a lot of my friends that I went to school with there, they had siblings the same age as my brother, a couple years older. So, a lot of us already knew each other, whether it be through sports or through hanging out even before we'd gone to school. So a lot of that kind of stuff was built early of getting to go over to my house. Again, it felt like a very old school version of it wasn't simply just staying inside all day. It was truly just being outside for much of the day.
yep.
It was just a little suburb, dead end street off a dead end street kind of thing. And it was great just to be outside. There would likely be sports in there playing, basketball in the driveway, that
Basketball,
sort of
yeah,
thing.
having a catch, yeah.
Yeah, so doing that, but then I mean, I am a huge video game fan, and maybe not refined by any means. It was more so the every sports game you can imagine. I will say MVP Baseball 2004 is the best baseball game ever for PlayStation
Hmm.
2. But thinking about other games like Gears of War, Halo, that kind of stuff. So it was always just the mix of the two of like this unspoken, we come back to my house, we get our work done, and everything, and we wouldn't put up a fuss. That we knew that. But then it was going outside basically until it got dark, and then getting to come inside, just chilling, all that. So just thinking of like just the routine of how I got to be used to that, and
Hmm.
just trying to think back, and I hope I appreciated it then. I don't know if I did. I think I just thought it was another day, but now I look back and I'm like, that's pretty great that it was, that was that house. I grew up in that house. My parents had that house honestly up until a couple years ago. So I mean, they had it for over 30 years. So it was just cool just to have those memories to literally go back to. Anytime I go back in the house, I can be looking around the house and remember things happening with my friends, with my family, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, that's a great. I think for me, I go back to like elementary school as well, and the friends I had, and my one friend had a sleepover, and it was like me, him, and like two other kids. That was it. And I remember us at like 3 in the morning, like sneaking out of his room, like I don't know. We thought it was super serious, like we were like army crawling when like we couldn't have a flashlight to go in the kitchen to get snacks. It was just like this fun, like we're probably fifth grade, like you're 10, 11, 12 years old, and we just thought like we were like biggest badasses in the world because we snuck it and got snacks. Like, I think if his parents would have called us, they'd been like, "Yeah, whatever. Like, it's a sleeper. We don't care." I remember stuff like that. I remember obviously there's some sports memories of like little league, baseball and whatnot. But I think you're right. Like playing. I remember getting Sega Genesis for Christmas. Like I remember
mm,
that. Like that was so cool. And like having that, and then like obviously progressing like Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, and like then GoldenEye came out. I had a thing on a Sega Genesis. Which a lot of people, it was Sega TV. I think that's what it was called.
mm,
You basically like plugged in, you like got it through your cable provider, and every month there'd just be like 20 games that you could play on like Sega TV. It was like
mm,
like a channel you could add to your cable subscriber, and it would go right to your Sega. It was really cool because you got to play a bunch of different games, and very before its time.
yeah,
I think of those sort of things. I do think it's a lot evolves when you're not talking sports. It evolves around friends, right? And those things you did with
sure.
friends, and you know those sort of activities. And now that both me and you are fathers, and my son's 11 and your son is 6, How important is it for you? And this is one thing I really appreciate about you, and just the time I've known you, is like you are very intentional about like this is my son, this is my day with my son, like this is my time with him. So why is it important for you to like make sure you're building core memories for you and your son and your wife?
Well, I've told my wife this before, but like when I was growing up, it was so my dad's an engineer. He's been like a systems like mechanical engineer for a good while at this point. And so growing up, I was always, I was never great at math, but I kind of tried to follow in his footsteps and thought about I'll be an engineer, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, as I was growing up, kind of a weird thing to think about. People think about like what they want to do like with their life, like professionally,
Yeah.
work wise. I was just like ultimately, I was like, I want to grow up and start a family, be a dad, be a husband. I was like, the profession thing will kind of sort itself out. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm a complete moron, and I think I can figure something out to help support a family. But ultimately, like, I want to have the family to be able to support. I was kind of putting the cart before the horse, I suppose. But that's kind of how I always saw it. With that's what I wanted, and that's I always say I do only have the one. No, I know plenty of people, including some of my friends, are having their second and what have you. But
Yeah.
having a kid is the most frustrating and rewarding thing on any given day, on any given hour, on any given minute, on any given second.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
very much either end of that spectrum, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. It is ultimately the best thing in the world.
No, I completely agree with you. Like my son is 11 and he drives me absolutely crazy, but I love him to death. Like, so I picked him. He's playing basketball at school. I picked him today from practice, and I was like, "Hey, I gotta go to Walgreens pick up prescription. I'm gonna drop you off at home so you can start your homework." And he's like, "Okay." It's like, "Just take your backpack. Don't take your gym bag." Like, it took him like it felt like it took him 5 minutes to get out of the car, and I'm like, "Dude!" I literally turned around. I was like, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I'm getting out of the car." I'm like, "This shouldn't take this long, man. Like, what is going?" And I'm driving to Walgreens, going like, "What took him so long?" But it's just because he's just in his he doesn't I had the same change, like, "Go inside, start your homework, I gotta run here real quick and get home and make dinner," but he didn't his world is just like, "I'm gonna get out of the car," and you're just like, "Ah," but you're like, "Oh, man, I love you," because you just have that, like, innocence to him, and I think it's important to, like, take time to be with your kid or kids if you have multiple if you're watching, and even your wife or your husband or your significant other, whatever that might be, because those are the things that you're gonna 10, 20, 30 years from now are gonna be like, "Remember the time when," and those will become those stories, and you're building core memories, especially when you're a father or mother and you have kids, like, you have to do things to build those core memories for them. Yes, they're gonna get it with their friends, and they're gonna get it from school and all these other places, but you are the when you have a baby, you are the provider for everything. You're a provider for food and shelter and clothing and bathroom and all that stuff, and as they get older, they don't need you for that kind of stuff. Like, my son can go get a snack, get food. He can function on his own. Like he could survive in the house on his own, but he can't make his own. Like he can't make core memories from it. He can't go to a movie. He can't go to a football game. He can't, you know, play catch by himself. That's just not something he can do. He needs me to do that. And so I have to be intentional. I think parents we have to be intentional to provide that. Also, core memories are not always good. Right, and I think you coined it as core nightmares. Core memories can be bad, and I think we try to shield our kids from those sort of things, the feelings of disappointment, of, shame, the feeling of, like, heartbreak, whether that's heartbreak from your team, heartbreak from a girl, whether that's, disappointment in not winning, disappointment in a bad grade, disappointment in you as a parent because you didn't do what they thought you were gonna do, disappointment in not getting the gift they wanted. And I wanna shield my son from those things because that does, as all core memories do, shape who they are as a person, how they interpret the world, and I want them to interpret the world in a good way. So, when working with my son, like, I picked him up from basketball, and he's like, "I'm just frustrated." I'm like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, one kid was setting a pick and knocked me over, but he didn't get talked to, and I slightly bumped a kid and I got talking to." And I was like, "Alright." I was like, "Here's the deal, bud. Every day I want you to find 2 things that were good. Like, this is gonna be the new norm. Every day when I talk to you, how was your day? I want you to tell me 2 things that were good because I want him to have this, like, positive outlook on life, like, focus on the positive, not the negative, and I think that's super important. So how did sports play into your core memories? I know we talk kinda non-sports, but let's talk about the sports realm. Like, what did you do as a kid that, like, were your core memories revolving around sports?
And well, I mean, sports was such a big part of it, and I think it's kind of how it kind of was kind of woven into the friends that I had, to where so many of us were, also participating in the same sports together. I know once you get to a certain point, I think when I was growing up, it probably wasn't as prevalent as it is today. But I know everything is a travel sport, everything is a year-round sport now. It was kind of becoming that way when I was growing up, depending on like how focused intentional you wanted to be with it. Like I played travel soccer for a little bit, but I know I had friends that played travel soccer since they were very young. Travel baseball was picking up, so there's a lot of those sorts of things that were kind of gaining steam. But you still had the chance. So many people still. You play basketball. You go play baseball. You play football. You just kind of do everything. And that was the cool thing. I was tremendously fortunate too, in a good system for like the rec league in my county. So a good amount of kids there, good coaches. My mom was actually, so when I was born, she had quit her job and she just became a stay-at-home mom. So she volunteered for basically everything at my school. She coached a number, I think almost all of my rec teams, not for like school or travel or anything like that, but but that was also like a way of like, she would do it and then she would try to, keep some of the friends together on a lot of the teams as best she could. So it's that kind of stuff where it's like, we get to win, we get to lose, but we're doing it together. We get to practice together. And even if it wasn't like a formal practice for a sport, we're just playing that sport in the yard of one of our houses. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I was never tremendous at sports. I guess soccer was probably my best one, but it was more just the camaraderie, especially of the team sport element, where you get to kind of be with these people. And sometimes you get to meet people through that. I know sometimes it was meeting people, say if it was when I was a little bit younger, you're playing a rec sport or whatever, but you're going to like the different county to play that group. So you end up meeting someone through that as you grow up and as you're getting into middle school and high school, you interact more with and you kind of become close with too. So it was a cool way to kind of, get to meet people maybe a little ahead of time than I would have otherwise, and kind of just grow like, a friendship group that, some were tighter, some were, a lot of my friends now are people that I've known since, elementary school and stuff, but some I met them a little later in life, but still, know them and talk to them today.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think sports for kids is a huge way of just building friendships, but also like just keep making friendships and building and continuing friendships. I played Little League Baseball, which everyone in my town played Little League Baseball. Good, bad, or different. I was not good. I couldn't hit. But I was a great fielder. I was a center fielder. I pretty much played the whole outfield. Like we just had two other crappy kids on either side of me, and I would just run over and catch the ball or get the ball when they couldn't. But it was great. Like my coach lived down the street, and his son played, and had that kind of relationship. We used to play a lot of. Me and my friends would play roller hockey. It'd be like there'd be like four of us, so like one person had to like suck it up and be the goalie. All we had was like the chest protector from a catcher's glove. I think we just had a baseball glove at one point. I think we had a mask. I think we had leg pads, and that was it. Like we didn't have all the gear. But it was just fun because we go like on, especially in the summer, you're like, hey, let's meet up at this school, we'll play, someone bring their net, and we just, skate around for hours. I remember when we got a little older and we had phones, we could order, like we went to the one person's house and ordered a pizza to the school, and like the guy came around, like, just fun stuff like that. And you just had fun. You're like, I'm gonna go play hockey, and you rollerblade to one person's house, and you pick him up, and you rollerblade to eventually all get there. Just fun stuff like that, and watching my son play basketball, he's okay. He's 11. It's elementary school basketball. It's not like anybody's all that good, but he just loves being with his friends. He loves the joking. I see him laughing and having fun. And whether those are core memories for him or not, I think the feeling he gets when he makes a basket or when they win a game, especially like a close game, is something he's always going to remember. That's going to be a core memory. Not every practice, not every game, not every shot, but like there's going to be one or two where it's like, I remember we were down and it was close and we made that last bucket, and it was just, those are going to be the core memories for him. I think that's so interesting because I've always said I can't really remember much like before like sixth grade, fifth or sixth grade. It's just really hard for me to remember that. But there's a few memories I have, and a lot of them involve maybe not around sports, but sports adjacent things. So like competitions, or the times I won, or I won I don't say a spelling bee, but like I won, whatever, a costume contest or something at school where it's like I was the person who stood out in that. And it's like that's sort of sports adjacent. So like those sort of extracurricular activities I think are huge, We're talking core memories. And so if you're listening, and you can drop a comment here on YouTube if you have a core memory that you really like or appreciate. But let's talk about not just playing sports, but being a fan of a team. What's your core memory of like watching and being a fan in sports? Like, what are those core memories like for you?
All right, so this one is kind of a mixed bag for me because some of mine are actually not even of my favorite teams. The first
Yeah.
one I immediately thought of when I was thinking core memory of something, I remember seeing it live and the David Tyree helmet catch.
Oh,
So
nice.
my family they're from upstate New York. They're Giants fans, they're Knicks fans, all that kind of stuff. So we were watching this game at my buddy's basement. It was having a bunch of the parents and the kids. Obviously, all of us knew each other. Were there, and I specifically remember that. Obviously, my parents were psyched just watching the Giants in the Super Bowl, and I remember just how impactful that was. And of course, I know that wasn't the only one. I think it was the Hakeem Nicks, the sideline catch, of course, was another tremendous one too. But it's those sort of moments that really stick out. I mean, other stuff like when I was much younger, I want to say it was elementary school. My buddy's parents had gotten season tickets and still have them to go see Virginia Tech football, and that's kind of the local. I know they have been a bit up and down the last couple of years, but was the local collegiate football team for the most part. They're about an hour away from where I live, and so I'd been to a couple of different games with him. Actually, I got to meet Frank Beamer at one point, which was
nice.
super super cool. And that was ultimately like seeing those games, and where I know I got to see a night game. They played Miami. And that was the first time I got to see a drunken encounter where a college kid was talking crap to a Miami alum, like middle-aged Miami alum, and then he just knocked him out.
Nice.
That was endearing to be like, oh, okay, so these people are real fans. That's great. But that actually kind of drove me, not that specific incident, but just the general environment and the fandom and everything of Virginia Tech, seeing the campus, to ultimately eventually go to Virginia Tech for college, which was awesome. But I'm a very big Red Sox fan, and I say that specifically because the best way I can explain it is I'm a Red Sox fan. I'm not necessarily a baseball fan, if that makes any sense.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, I know baseball is a big, long season. I know it's tough to, even if you're a fan of a team, it's maybe tough to sincerely watch every single game throughout that season. But growing up, before I fully realized that I was not very good at baseball, I was a huge fan of Manny Ramirez, and that was when he was on the Cleveland Indians. So that was my first jersey. I had like a T-shirt jersey of Manny Ramirez, and he in 2000 went to the Red Sox. I was not super savvy on, the history and the struggle of the Red Sox with the curse and everything. So naturally, 4 years after that, they of course break the curse.
Yeah.
I do remember that though. I do remember that series against the Yankees, and it's almost more like it's them beating the Yankees, and it's long forgotten that it was them sweeping the Cardinals in the actual World Series. It was more so the series before that of
where they beat the Yankees. Yep.
So, and of course, my family is Yankees fans, so I've been somewhat disowned because of that. I do actually have a Boston B tattooed right here. So
nice.
They don't like that very much. But that kind of stuff. I mean, I've got to see the Red Sox in Camden Yards, which that's not terribly far from where I live. A couple hours, but not too bad.
Yeah.
Got to see him in New Yankee Stadium. Got to see him in Fenway, and ironically, the local single A affiliate MLB team is the Salem Red Sox. That's actually the Red Sox.
Oh, nice.
High A affiliate team. So, yeah, I mean, just a lot of mixed bag of those sorts of things. And yeah, what about you?
Yeah, for me, it's it evolves not so much like I remember my first baseball game, not the game itself. I remember going to and from the game. So it was a friend of mine's birthday. His parents let him bring like 3 or 4 friends, and we got in the car. And I remember driving to the game. A bird got stuck like in the hood of the car, like it's like wing, and it was like flapping. I don't remember the game. I know we were at the old vet stadium where the Phillies play. We were really high up, and I just remember coming home. It was the first time I ever saw someone moon us. Like he was like people were mooning us for what, like just because they were all like it was just like And I was probably, I mean, I must have been in elementary school. I probably was in 5th or 6th grade. I just remember like, oh, that's a man's butt, like on the windshield. Like, what is going on? We're all just like, and of course that part like, it's a butt, and you all think it's funny, but like just that camaraderie. One of my biggest core memories for me is revolves around the Bills Super Bowls. Obviously, I'm a Bills fan. I was in, I think, I want to say sixth, seventh, eighth grade when they went to 4 in a row. And I remember the third, it was the second or third one. I remember a kid who was a Dallas fan. So it must have been the third one because it was a Dallas fan. He goes, I'll bet you $20 that the Cowboys win. I was like, sure. Like, let's bet. I have $20, but I was like, sure. And I remember them losing, and I remember going to school the next day, and he's like, "Where's my $20?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll bring it tomorrow." And I remember I had to ask my parents, like, "I need $20. I bet this kid $20." And they were like, "Okay, don't bet." And for me, like, it wasn't the game itself, which obviously were disappointing, but it was that day after, just like, oh man, I'm walking in and my team lost, and I think that
Mm,
shaped who I am. Like, I don't bet. I don't like to bet on sports because you just don't know. Like, there's too much uncertainty for me in a lot of it. Like, I just feel like I can never be confident in a bet. And sometimes when I am confident, I'm like, oh, this is probably going to pay out, and it just doesn't. I'm like, that's why I don't bet. So things like that. I mean, like you, I am not a basketball fan, but I have a favorite basketball player. It's Jerry Stackhouse.
nice.
I've been to, I think, only 2 basketball games, and both times Jerry Stackhouse has played. I went to a Pistons game in Detroit when he was playing for the Pistons, and I went to a Sixers game when he played for the Sixers. Just by random things, I was like, well, he's my favorite player now. Like, I like his name.
There you go.
In 7th and 8th grade, I worked at a baseball card shop. And so that kind of shaped a lot of like my knowledge of sports and my love of sports. And seeing like the old timers come in and like talk about, all the old players and looking through old cards and like obviously the new cards, like that was when Emmitt Smith and Troy Aikman and all those guys. It was the day before, it was the year before, it was the junk whack era. So before all these inserts of patches and autos, there wasn't, it was just like cool inserts, but you had all the big names. Obviously, there were still some Bills players, Dan Marino, Jim Kelly were still around. But I wasn't into baseball, but people come in like, I'm looking for, the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie. I'm looking for this Frank Thomas or whoever it was. And it was like, oh, just I can see the passion that those people had for those sports. Really just kind of like, oh, people are super passionate. It like almost was like I found my people. Like these people are passionate about sports too. And I worked 2 nights a week. I worked 4 to 8. I got paid $10 and I got McDonald's. Like I would go next day, would pay for my McDonald's across the street. I would just help the old guy like run the shop. I'd price packs, vacuum, check people out. It was just a great fun job. And of course I'd get $10 and then I'd pull 10 and I'd just buy packs and then give him his $10 back. But I think those, when it comes to sports and like watching sports, it really did affect my fandom. And when we're talking about like card price, then of course when you're at a card shop, it's like, well, Troy Aikman is worth more than Jim Kelly. And I'm like, yeah, but Jim Kelly's a better quarterback. Like they're going to the Super Bowl. Like it just became like this. It almost like hardened my fandom because it was like I have to defend my fans because their cards aren't worth as much and they keep losing, but they're still just as good, right? And like, oh, they went to 4 in a row and they didn't win. I'm like, yeah, but they went to 4 in a row. When was the last time your team even went to 1? Like, it just kind of helped me like harden that. So I think it's true. Like I used to love, I've been to a bunch of Bills games, but there's a couple that stand out. My family had season tickets. They're from Buffalo, so they had Buffalo Sabres games. So I grew up with some Sabres, Sabre fandom as well, and I still have that. Like I said, I've been to like 2 basketball games. I've been to a couple baseball games. I don't love going to baseball. I like going for the food, like, I like that.
Yep.
But I think there's just a sense of, for me, it's always been the fandom and like the group activity that is sporting events of like going, hang out with your friends, going with, different people and kind of just having that like one-on-one time, but like just having that, the fanfare of a game, the fanfare of, that's why I love going to the draft and the combine. Cause like the fanfare of it is just so much fun of like, it's just worth it to go. Like I keep telling people, like, if you can go to an NFL draft, just go because the fanfare of it is so crazy. It's just so fun. So 2 years it's coming to Pittsburgh, which I don't think is too far from you. So I mean, it's definitely worth it. Like, bring your son up, like get a hotel for a night and just come up. And I think it's just going to be one of those things where you just, when you're around 150, 250,000 people who all just are crazy about sports, and there's all this excitement, and you have Ravens jerseys next to Steelers jerseys next to Brown jerseys, and they all get along. It's like, oh man, this is so cool. That's what I really love about it. And it does impact my fandom on some level when there's certain players. So me going and covering the combine and the draft, there are players that I'm irrationally fan of. And we talked about this in an episode a couple of weeks ago about being irrationally fandom. I just like them because I've connected with them on a regular basis. Like I got to interview Dylan Lobby, who's a running back for the Raiders, who hasn't been active, but I just liked him because I interviewed him. I got to build that kind of connection. That was a core memory because he was the first player I've ever got to interview in that level. and just builds that kind of like fandom for him and a little bit for the Raiders because I want him to succeed. And if he was on the Raiders, if he goes to any team but the Dolphins, I'll root for him. It's exactly what I told him. I said, you go anywhere but the Dolphins, I'll root for you. So I think that's interesting. And I think sports really do play a big part, and good or bad will shape how you see the world. If you are a Lion, my dad is a Lions fan, and the Lions have never been good in his lifetime until now. And that really did shape his lack of love for football because it was always the hapless Lions and it
Yeah.
was, never gonna be anything. And he's, excited for, and he's not a huge fan, but he's excited for his family and friends that are fans. And my uncle just passed away. My uncle was a huge Lions fan, and my dad was just like, it's gonna be sad that, my brother didn't get to see the Lions win a Super Bowl, and now they have like a legit shot. I'm like, yeah, that
Mhm.
kind of sucks. And I'm sitting there like, man, I just want to see a Bills win one before I die, and I'm 42.
Yeah.
And so I think it does shape like part of you. So if you're a fan of the Yankees, like yes, you probably that's why Yankees fans have that kind of swagger to them because they've always been good. That's why, you know, Chargers fans are kind of rowdy because they just have nothing else going for them. Like that's why certain fan bases are the way they are because it's based on their team. When your team wins all the time, of course you're going to be cocky. When your team loses all the time, you're either going to be miserable or you're going to be just an insufferable jerk and like a rowdy, beat people up because you have nothing else. You got to take your aggression out somewhere. That's what's fun about fandom, and that's why it makes these corner. It does shape how you view the world, which I think is super interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's I mean, just thinking about that, it is funny as you mentioned about like the fandoms. Like I know like that I feel like every year or so they do sometimes like the polls of like figuring out like the best and worst
Yeah.
like fans. I think it may be more tied to cities. I'm not entirely sure because I know sometimes it can translate to, this city's baseball and football and what have you. But that is interesting to think about of just, like how a city and how a fandom can kind of go like with the wind in terms of like, are you doing well? Great. Did you do bad the next game? I hate you now. Like
Yep.
but that is fandom. Yeah.
I mean, I'm from Philadelphia, and obviously they have all four of the major sports. And for a
Yeah.
long time, they weren't that good. Like they were good in the early '80s, right? Like the Eagles win the Super Bowl, the Sixers were okay. Dr. J back in the day, and the Flyers were good back in the day, and then the Flyers were still good, in the '90s, and then Phillies were okay, and then the Phillies got really good, and but they never got over the hump, and it just created this like angst in Philadelphia of like our sports teams get close, but never. There's one thing when your team is bad and you're like, okay, we're bad. Like, okay, like if you're a Cleveland fan, like the Browns are always bad, the Indians are always bad. You're just like, okay, we're bad.
Yeah.
Cavaliers are always bad. When you're in a city like Philadelphia where like they get close but just can't get over the hump, you just builds this angst, and that's why we talk about Philly fans like, oh, they threw batteries at Santa. Like, yeah, because there was this angst in the city because so much of their core memories were based around disappointments of close but no cigar, and that does, I think, shaped a lot of the essence of the city. And I think if you go to Philly now, I think Philly fans are just as rowdy, but they're not like there's no angst because the teams have won. The Eagles have won a Super
Yeah.
Bowl, Phillies had won, the Sixers are doing okay. Like there's just less angst because they have a couple championships in the past 10 years. And so it just creates like that angst is gone and they're still just as passionate. They're just not as destructive as they used to be, which
Yeah,
I think is
absolutely.
great. All right, before we got one more segment here. Let's do a draft. We're going to do a 3-round draft, snake draft of memories that we want to most revisit and relive. So you can go back in time and someone's like a magic genie's here and he's like, hey, you can go back and revisit and replay this memory. We'll do a snake draft. I'll let you have, do you want the first pick or 2 and 3?
I'll go the first pick.
All right, let you go with the first pick. What are you going to take as your first memory that you want to relive?
So this one's pretty easy for me.
There's 2 that are the top as far as I'm concerned.
The first one will be a surprise that I'm picking this one over the other one that is likely what you're talking about.
Okay.
Seeing my son walk. That was on Christmas.
Okay.
On Christmas Day, he had just turned. So it was basically he was 1 in a month ish, and he literally did it right there around family. Like it was, all the family was together, like up in North. Actually, it was in Maryland. Actually, at my wife's aunt's house, and he just popped up, and everybody just lost their minds. It was great.
That's interesting. That was not one of the top 2 I had. That's really interesting. I didn't even think about that one like that. I guess I just didn't have like that with my son. It wasn't like, oh my gosh. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
he's walking. The one that I thought first of, and the one I'll take for my first pick is my wedding day. Like getting married and seeing my wife come down the island. Just that whole day of the wedding, the reception, like enjoying that moment. I think if I could go back and relive it, I'd do things different. Like I would be more intentional. Like there was people I didn't even talk to at my wedding because I like just didn't have time. So I think there
Yep.
would be a way to just like do it better and make it just 10% better, right? And just kind of relive that sense of like, oh, it's not even like love, I would say, like that sense you get when your wife's walking down the aisle, or you just
Mhm.
like is this like, oh my gosh, I'm here. I can't believe this. Like that's where I would be. So that's gonna be my first one. I would love to relive my wedding day. And then the other one that I thought was 101 or 102 is the birth of my child, which I think
Yeah.
is huge. Like that day when just like all of a sudden you have a being that like you're like when they say your heart is outside your body, that really is what it is. Like you are now holding, and it's like this whole like this thing that you love, and it has done nothing. Like it has done nothing but take like two breaths, and you love it more than anything else in the world. There's just that sense of like love and pride and fear, and
Mhm.
it's just so overwhelming that it's hard to take in at that moment. And so I would love to go back and just relive that and just feel that again of that. It's a unique feeling. I don't think you can feel any other time because you just have this, especially when it's your first one.
Yeah.
You don't know. You're just like, I have this thing now that counts on me for everything.
Yep.
Like everything it needs, I need to provide, and like everything I do is going to impact them one way or the other. So like it just makes you like the way I drive. If I stop too fast, his car seat's gonna like tip over. If I stop too slow, someone's gonna rear end me. And it's just like all these thoughts, and you're just like, but you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so in love with this thing that has done nothing but breathe.
Yeah.
That is just amazing. So I'll take that as my second one. You were up for your last two. What are you gonna take?
So, admittedly, my immediate thought was the two that you just said when I first thought of this, and I was like, I'm gonna go a little off the beaten path. So the first one, of course, my son walking. The
Yep.
second one, I'm actually going to say, I'll go with. So it wasn't. I guess we call it the first date. So the first date for my wife and I. So we actually had
Yeah.
met on Tinder. So
Nice.
I went to Virginia Tech and she went to Radford. So the proximity, I mean, it was within whatever the radius was of like, it was within that radius that worked out. And so we had actually, ironically, she was on the paper at Radford, writing on the paper. And
Nice.
she actually was on the paper with one of my buddies who I grew up with, happened to also be on the paper. And we found that out later on, but I was just like, do you think at one point we would have met if it wasn't on Tinder? Just because, like, you know him, and like, I
Yeah.
mean, I've known him since I was like 5, and it's like, I don't know, maybe, but so it ended up being, so we were on Tinder and we talked for I'm trying to think, it was a couple of months of just talking. We hadn't met in person yet, and it was Tech calls it reading day, so it's literally like before final exams and everything,
Was
and
study day. Yep.
yeah, so and Radford I think got out a week before us, so she had finished her exams or whatever she was going to do. So it was reading day. I probably should have been studying, but I was not. And
Yeah.
so she was on her way back. She was from Northern Virginia, so she was obviously going to be passing Virginia Tech, the exit. So she had her car packed up. She was ready to go home, and she was like, "Hey, why don't we should just meet like in person? Like I'm about to go up, but like I'll be there for the summer and stuff." It's like So we ended up meeting at the Panera Bread in Blacksburg. Shout out, I believe it's still there. And she literally had her car packed and made sure that she thought there's a decent possibility she was still being catfished because she had not met me in person and wasn't sure. And so she met me and made sure she had somebody that was going to call her at some random point.
Yeah.
And she said, which I didn't know that part necessarily, but I'd guess probably I was like, well, you're meeting me and you've never met me, so like there might be some level of fear.
Yeah.
And 3 hours later, she ignored all those phone calls. She, like it was incredible just to meet her. And now it's, over 11 years later of having met each other, known each other. And just, it's unbelievable to have started a family. We've got a house, got careers, and just wild to think time's flown so much.
Yeah. That's crazy. I've had a couple of those like where you just like meet someone and you're like, oh, I didn't realize we've been together for like 8 hours. So my wife and I had a very interesting. We met at my cousin's wedding, and we did we talked and we danced, and then we exchanged emails. And I was on this road trip with my dad, and I remember coming back on the way. We went from Wisconsin up to Minneapolis to see an uncle, over to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, visit another uncle in South Dakota, and we were coming back. I don't know where we were, just driving, and I'm emailing who's now my wife, and we're emailing back and forth, and we're just going to my dad. He's like, "Hey, you've been emailing this girl a lot," and I go, "Yeah, pretty sure she's the one." But I was like, "Really?" And I go, "Yep." And that was just a fun memory. And I think there's obviously your wife and your kid are a big part of both our lives, and I think it's a big part of if you have a wife or kid or significant other and kid, those are big parts of your life. You spend the majority of your time with them. You involved in pretty much everything you're doing. So for my last pick, I've had a couple written down. Um, I've been to a bunch of Bills games. The Bills Dolphins game I went to for my 18th birthday was kind of a thing. I remember when Jim Kelly retired, I told my dad, like, you got 5 years to figure it out because we're going to the Hall of Fame. And that was kind of fun to go to the Hall of Fame for Jim Kelly getting inducted. You know, um, my senior class trip was to Disney, which was a ton of fun. I had a blast. It was just one of those trips that it was the first time I felt like I was ever on my own and like I could actually do stuff. And I remember my mom worked at my school and she was asked to be a chaperone, and it was like, hey, if you come, you can chaperone everyone but me. But I'll take the first time we went to Disney with our son William, and that we're a Disney family. So we've been to Disney 5 or 6 times. The first time we took him, I think he was 4. And I hadn't been to Disney since my senior class trip. So you're talking like 20 years later. And just seeing the wonder and the awe in his eyes was just so like, oh, this is what you should like. And I was really worried about Disney because I was like, oh, I'm gonna hate it because it's gonna be all princesses and because that's what for me that was Disney was. It was all these princesses and that's what they kind
Yeah.
of pushed. But just going there and seeing this like wonder in his eyes of like, oh, there's Chip and Dale, and like seeing him being excited and had an autograph book and get those pictures and just like and I'm like, oh, I remember doing this. And I was like, oh yeah, that's still my wife had worked there back in the 80s. And it was just this whole like my wife had worked at Disney, so she was like the Disney expert, even though she hadn't been there in 20, 30 years. I had been twice in my life before that, but it had been 20 years. And then we're taking a 4-year-old, but just seeing like me going in like, oh, this isn't just all princesses. And then seeing my son just like light up when he sees these characters that he watches on TV and the fun and excitement and go on the rides and watch them just have fun was just such a magical time because like that first time you can never redo that. You can like even when we go back now, it's still just as cool and it's even better because they've upgraded things and the shows are better. But it's just that first time was amazing. That first time we went, and maybe it was the second time we went. One of the times we went, we played. They used to have this game called it's like this card game where you'd run around they'd have different maps. You like go to these like hidden screens and you scan them, and it was just really cool. And me and my son did that for like hours. It was just so much fun. We just had a blast. Like just spending time with my son and just seeing him be like, let's go to, and just the excitement that he had for Disney just was like, oh man, buddy, I'm so happy you get to do this. And I'm so happy I'm here. And it's just made like every other trip. And that's why we just keep going back because it's just so magical. Disney does it right. Like I know people hate Disney for various reasons, but every kid should get to go to Disney, in my opinion. Like that should just be every kid should just get to go. If I ran Disney, I'd be like, listen, every kid gets a discount on their first time. Like if you can prove it's their first time, like keep a list. Like every kid should just get a discount. Like it's just so magical because it's just that wonder and amazement that you just like you think you know what it is, but you have no clue till you get there. It's like the sights, the sound. It's like so immersive, and then the rides they have now are just amazing. It's just so much fun. Absolutely. I'll take that first time taking my son to Disney was just a memory that really has stuck with me of like, how do I continue to create something similar to that on a daily, weekly basis? Like, how do I continue to make sure he sees the wonder in things, but also provide experience for him? So like, I really want to take him to his first NFL game probably next year. He's really starting to get into football. Like that's my goal. Like if I can take him to a Packers game or a Bears game, they're both equal distance. I'd love to go see if we can get a Bills game close by, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But that's where I'm at. So you took first time your son walked, you took your first date, and what was the other one you took?
I haven't done one yet.
Oh, you got one more.
Yeah, one more. And it is kind of along the same lines of one of the ones that you had done. So it's actually when my wife told me that she's pregnant.
Oh,
So
yes.
that was a if I look back on it, it's kind of just like a normal day of just how everything else was happening.
Mhm.
But it's funny just trying to through her perspective after she told me of like what was going on. Of I don't do it really as much anymore. My dad does autocrossing, so it's basically the like slimmed down version of basically racing in parking lots, but it's organized, it's that kind of stuff, and it's all above board. There's insurance, all that kind of stuff. But I've done that with him. It's super fun to do. But I mean, you're out there for hours on the day. It's in the middle of a parking lot in the summer. You're just out there cooking, and
Right.
so it's exhausting by the end of the day. So my wife had found out while I was out doing that. So she was just waiting this entire time. Like she knew I was doing that. She knew it takes, a bit of time. So she just had to just be sitting there waiting for me to come home to tell me. And I'm not a super aware person. Is probably the best way to say it. I won't say stupid. I'll just say not that aware sometimes. And I came home and exhausted from just being in the sun for like 6 hours. And so I came in and was just going to chill. And what she had done was she had gotten a mug that she was trying to like give me like some coffee or something. She was like, hey, like sit down, like how was the race, whatever. And she was kind of being like, yeah, do you want like some coffee or something? And
You're like, no.
in my head, I'm like, no, that I was like, I would like water, or but that'd be weird that I'd be having water out of a coffee mug. So she kept trying to just push like, no, like have some. And I'm like, I don't really understand why you're being incessant about me having this coffee. And I eventually, because it was kind of like this weird laughter back and forth, because I clearly still didn't get it of what it was. Eventually, I started drinking a little bit of it, and then I drank it, and then like held it, and was like, she was looking at me, and I'm like, I know I'm missing something, but I have no clue what it is. I was like, did you put something in the drink? Like, I don't know what's happening right now.
You have no clue, yeah.
And then I like went and looked. It was, she'd gotten a mug where it says on the bottom on the inside, I'm pregnant. So it says that, but she had to go through the whole thing of getting me to drink it, getting me to see the bottom of it. And I think maybe in the commercials of this, it works out way smoother, but
Sure.
I'll just say I'm stupid and I didn't understand it. So it took all of this coaxing and like, no look of me to finally like figure it out.
You're like, what? I'm just drinking my coffee. Yeah, I can see that.
Then it was the moment of that
one.
happening, but then it was just like the awe and the excitement and the fear, but then also just the laughter of like, I know how you wanted this to go, and it's so much funnier that it went this way.
That's exactly those are the perfect moments where it's like you want it to go perfectly and smoothly, but like it's more organic and fun that it didn't. When my wife told me she was pregnant, we went down to visit her brother, and we have a German Shepherd, our previous German Shepherd we took down with us. So you're talking like a 70-pound dog, right?
Yeah.
And her niece had like taken in 2 cats from a friend or 3 cats from a friend. And her brother was like, can't have them in the house. They got to be barn cats. So they brought the 1 cat in, saw my dog, freaked out. Brought the 2nd cat in, saw my dog, freaked out. Brought the 3rd cat in, who was like this little kitten, and just was like, oh, let me go see what this dog's all about. Like went over like this, investigate the dog. So we leave, and I was like, oh, we should take that cat. That cat is gonna die. It's not afraid of big animals. Like we should take that cat. And I was like, I don't want a cat. Like I don't
Yeah.
the cats are fine, but like I told her, I was like, I don't want to scoop a litter box. She's like, I'll do all that.
Yeah.
She goes, the only thing is that if we were possibly gonna have kids, we had just gotten married. She's like, well, if I get pregnant, I'm not supposed to scoop the litter box. I was like, fine. When you get pregnant, I'll scoop the litter box. And so she's like, I don't know, maybe. And I was like, listen, I still don't want the cat. Then we're like, it's like a 2-hour drive home. Within an hour of driving, she's in tears. And I'm going, what's going on? She goes, and this was, and literally, and then like for days, I'd come home from work and she'd just be crying. That poor cat, it's gonna die. It's not afraid of big animals, and we gotta go rescue it. And I'm like, dude, it's a cat. Like, what's going on? Like, you're freaking out about this cat. So we called them on Wednesday and said we would like to take that cat. They said, great, we'll meet you for lunch on Saturday halfway. So we called them on Thursday. We were gonna meet them on Saturday. Friday night, she takes a test and goes, well, I know why I was crying about the cat. I was pregnant. I'm like, you gotta be freaking kidding me.
We don't want the cat anymore.
I was like, I want the cat. But it was the hormones from that just made her so like emotional about this cat that she kind of like this motherly instinct kicked in. But Yeah, that was how she's like, that's, I was like, well, now we got a cat because you're pregnant. Thanks. So, no, it's so funny because when you talk about kids, like, right, the moment you find out you're gonna have a child, the moment you actually have the child, the moment they first walk, or when they first say their first word, or there's so many memories. For us as parents, I think it's as we get older, it's harder to make core memories, right? Because we've experienced so much that there's just not a lot of new stuff left. So those are the core memories, right? And then obviously stuff with our wives, the first dates, the weddings, those kind of things are always super fun. And I do think that does play into a lot of who we are as people, right? And they like, if I didn't have a kid, I'd be a completely different person. If I didn't have my wife, I'd be a vastly different person, right? Like I think we would both be very different than who we are. And just those things kind of, I think, soften us a little bit as men. I think it definitely helps us see things from a different perspective. And then when we look at sports, I think sports plays into it. I think, you're a Carolina Panthers fan, so the struggles you guys are going through, right? You guys keep pounding. It's I don't know. Are you guys going to keep pounding now that the drums broke? I'm not sure what you guys are going to do because Luke Kuechly broke the drum. But like that shapes you. Like, and I think you guys had a lot of hope when you guys drafted Bryce Young, and that kind of hope is waning a little bit. But like that definitely plays into who you are, and right, knowing where you guys could be based on the years with Cam Newton, and me as a Bills fan, I know where we can be, and we just got to get past the Chiefs this weekend, and then eventually the playoffs. Like that shapes us. And as a Bills fan, the way I view the season is like we're just not going to make it. Like I've seen this before. Like we get close and we can't beat the Chiefs, or I've seen this make the Super Bowl 4 times and lose. So I'm a little jaded, but I think that's just it's part of who I am now, and that's all part of it. So appreciate you coming on talking core memories. It's a little bit of a different podcast than I think what most people are used to. So I hope you guys listening enjoyed it. Please drop a like and subscribe. Chew, before we get out of here, tell them one more time where they can find you and anything you got going on this year.
Yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Father Dynasty, and anything and everything that I will be doing will likely flow through that. So if you talk to me there, then you'll find out. And Dustin, I just want to say it is always great to catch up with you. So very glad to be doing this, and I love the show, and you're doing great things. So keep it up.
Well, thank you. I mean, like I said, you were like I think the second or third podcast I did when I started doing podcasts, and it was just I reached out to you and I was like, "Hey, I like your podcast. You need to get you." Like, sure, come on next week. So I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you just always like reaching out and saying hi. At the expo 2 years ago, you were like, "Dustin," I was like, "Hey, Chew, what's up?" And I do appreciate the way you are intentional with your wife and kids. Like you set a day aside for your son. Like this is day I'm not like even when you were heavy into content, you were like, "No, this day I'm doing stuff with my son. Like that's his day. I won't be reached." So I think that's always great. And I think that's a great testament to you as a father and as a man. So I think it's great that you're making those core memories with him. So I think in 2 years, you got to make one to come up to the draft in Pittsburgh. I think that'd be fun.
Like Ray
so I should be there too. So I think that'd be a good time. So everyone, thanks for tuning in. Like I said, hit that like, subscribe, go follow Chew on Twitter. You can follow me at the D13 or the pod at BTG_podFF. This has been a great episode of Bridge the Gap. Next week, we got a special episode. I'm going to be bringing on someone to talk Blue Sky. We're going to have someone talk Fantasy Football Advice Network. I'll be the Twitter advocate, and we're going to talk social media as kind of the pros and cons of the different social platforms that are really popular right now. It's kind of a hot button topic in the fantasy space. So if you're interested in why you should join Blue Sky or why you should stay on Twitter or join Twitter or not, come check us out next week, every Tuesday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Bridge the Gap.